Je chimbur zordar hingmi jang zoner monum chimbur ngab jada bakra dargam zando shulmur do tumba tukje chanla ke shamza nichen ruwar zeringi jankam sa jagur tukje shullo yularman jime banzo jala soran gongge toban por shingi lo ushan shan
The
shan
supreme, profound, and sublime Dharma is difficult to encounter in a billion eons. Now I see it, hear it, receive it, and kept it. I vow to attend the true meaning of the Tathagata. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us generate the supreme bodhicitta. Well, let us now continue with our class on the text composed by the great Terton Lerab Lingpa. The text titled The Root of the Mahayana Path of Three Supremes. In the previous classes, we have already covered on the part on the first supreme, which is the supreme of aspiration. Today we will get into the supreme of the actual practice, which is the supreme actual practice that is without an object. In our previous class, we had already explained that whatever kinds of virtuous deeds that you are doing, you need to first make the aspiration of bodhicitta. And that act alone makes your action becomes then action of the Mahayana. But we need to familiarize ourselves with these kinds of teachings again and again. Many of you probably thought that, well, I've studied this before many times. I myself, in fact, had also taught this many times. But this particular text provides more concepts, or maybe you can call it as pith instructions, that's unique than the other teachings that we had before. I think practice is really important to each of us practitioners. So I hope that you don't forget it or brush it off right after the class. That would be quite pitiful. Encountering such a Dharma teaching is very difficult. It's not easy. So you need to pay close attention to it. Now, beginning from today, we will talk about the actual practice that is without an object. How to practice it, you may ask. The virtuous roots, if we can practice if we can have the actual practice that is without any object, that would be supreme, which means that our virtuous roots are not going to be destroyed by the external conditions. This is really important. This particular supreme method includes three aspects. That is the virtuous roots without object, the common actual practice without objects, and the uncommon actual practice without objects. Now, in terms of the virtuous roots, actual practice without object, in terms of translation, maybe I think it would be best translated in such a way. Well, I think maybe it is called, maybe it should be named as the three types of objectless, because that is according to the outline of this text. Let's look at the first one, which is our mind should not be distracted in terms of the actual practice or the root, a virtuous root. Means that within any kinds of practice, our minds do not get distracted to other places, and our mind would be stayed at the state that is neither too tight nor too loose. Rather, it is at a state of being of clarity, knowing the meaning of teachings. On top of that, we should be joyous and confident, wholeheartedly focus on the meaning of the teaching. without being too tight nor too loose, one should practice diligently. Previously, in my teachings, I think I mentioned this particular way of practice as well. In my previous Dharma teachings, the text that's transcribed from the classes, I believe you noticed that. But we can see that the Great Terton stated this particular point very clearly. And this particular teaching is not that clear or obvious in the other practices or teachings on the objectless actual practice. When we talk about the objectless actual practice, we talk about the threefold emptiness. One should practice within such threefold emptiness. But for mundane beings, especially beginners, it is very difficult. And the Great Terton also stated in various places that, of course, he humbly states that I am a beginner and it will be difficult. Of course, he's being very humble. But to us, the ordinary beings, when we speak of the three supremes, when we practice, for example, the great compassion or Amitabha, what we should do is that while we are practicing the visualization of the Amitabha in accordance with the sadhana, our mind should not be too tight nor too loose. We should not be drowsy. We should stay in a state of clarity, and we should not fall into that drowsy and dark, ignorant state. Our mind should be devoted to the Dharma teaching, should be joyful, and should be focused. In this way, it is called, or this is considered as the objectless actual practice. Now, this is quite an important point to remember, because it would be very difficult for the beginners to practice. I hope you remember it. Now we have the particular evidence that this is the way to practice according to the Great Terton. Then we need to practice in such a way. After encountering the Dharma, for those of you who practice Dharma for a period of time, I'm sure you will notice that this is such a precious teaching and you would cherish it. But if you don't really practice and you have never even made the aspiration of bodhicitta, then of course you only care about maybe good sleep, good health, and you care about food and drink and all of those worldly goals, but nothing spiritual. For those people, then of course I understand that you don't care. But for those of you who truly, genuinely care about the Dharma, then this is a key instruction. While you're practicing the actual practice without an object, you should not practice it. You should practice it neither too tightly nor too loosely. Rather, you should practice it in such a way with great diligence. At the beginning of practice, you should not be too tight, especially when it comes to practice of emptiness. There are people who, at the very beginning, practice for too long, then some issues may occur. When people get into retreats, all kinds of confusions may arise, or people even get abnormal after such periods of very tight and tense practice. So, as a beginner, we should practice constantly, but in short period of time. As a beginner, we should not try to block the dualistic thoughts, the conceptual thoughts, because the more we try to stop it, the more it may become like landslide or flooding. We need to learn how to work with it. That is why the Great Terton over here says that as beginners, our mind is just like a wild horse. it is very distracted, so it's very difficult to tame it right at the beginning. But over here, he says that I am like a beginner whose mind is like a wild horse, who's constantly get distracted. But if his mind is like a wild horse, we need to remember that he is a great turtle who's been entrusted by Pamasambhava and reviewed over 20 volumes of Dharma. So he's definitely not like that at all. He's being very humble. He continued to say that if the mind can if your mind could maintain not being distracted nor being drowsy, if you continuously to work in such a way, your mind would be able to maintain in such kind of insight for a period of time. It is to slowly and slowly protect your mind, and your mind slowly would be able to calm down. At that moment, then maybe you can study, for example, impermanence and difficult to obtain human life and so on. Your mind would be able to uphold those teachings. So it takes a period of time to tame the mind that is like a wild horse.
So
if your mind stream cannot be comparable to the high view that you talk about, if your mind stream still is yet to reach all of those high level of or high views such as Mahayati, Mahamudra, and all of that, then it would be better for us to practice on our mind stream rather than talking about all of those high views. That would be better. According to the Miscellaneous Agama Sutra, it talks about if a person who is holding a bowl that is filled with oil all the way to the top, but then he's being threatened if even one drop of oil is being spilled out of the bowl, he would be punished to death or would have death punishment. Knowing that this person who's holding the bowl would walk with great caution and there is no distraction whatsoever, doesn't matter whatever kinds of beautiful sounds or forms that is around him, he is not going to pay attention. For that reason, if we were to pay attention to the Dharma practice that we engage in, which would lead us to liberation and all kinds of fear. At times of practice, we need to reach to that stable level of insight. That would be the best. I believe Sangha once talked about method of meditative absorption. He talks about how a distracted mind brings the rivers and streams of birth and death. So we need to practice wholeheartedly with focus. If we were to train ourselves this way, then we can get accustomed to it. And that is how the senior practitioners would do. So when you first settle yourself and slowly, naturally, you would be able to abide in your own insight or your own realization. This is the beginning of the objectless actual practice. For mundane beings or the beginners, whatever kinds of practice it may be, for example, the 100,000 times of Pamasambhava mantra, you need to visualize Pamasambhava without being distracted by anger and desire and so on. You should not do that. Then this is called objectless actual practice. If you were to practice selflessness or bodhicitta, then you should not be distracted by your cell phone, by other books, and so on and so forth. Rather, you should engage solely in that practice. That is why in majority of the Ati practices, it is not allowed to use any cell phones or listen to the teachings of a Dharma teacher. None of those are used. In fact, you just need to practice. You need to let go of all the chores, all the other distractions, just wholeheartedly abide in your own practice. This is called objectless practice. You need to remember that. The second aspect is the common practice that is without an object. This is the main part of this particular text because it talks about selflessness of a self and selflessness of phenomena. So it is the realization of selflessness of self it is a realization of selflessness. There are four aspects of conditions that would destroy one's virtuous roots. The first one is aggression. Even one moment of aggression would destroy virtuous roots that's accumulated for lifetimes. The second one is regret. Even if we were to feel regret for the practices that we had conducted, then that would destroy the virtuous roots. And then the third one is to boast and bluff about or show off about the virtuous deeds that you've done. For example, I've released life, I've prostrated for so and so times and just started showing off. The fourth one is not practicing or not concluding a practice with the rededication of merit, the Mahayana method of rededication of merit. This is expounded more extensively in the great commentary of the aspiration to be reborn in Sukhavati. Generally speaking, all of these vice deeds or non-virtuous actions are the obstacles for virtuous deeds. If we were to create all kinds of vice deeds because we seek for all kinds of goals, the worldly goals in this lifetime, then we would not have any causes and conditions or auspicious connections to engage in practice. In the Liberation Through Hearing and other teachings, it talks about the greatest Mara within three realms is the self-grasping. That is the greatest Mara, the biggest Mara. If we can tame that, if we can tame the self-grasping, which is the root of all afflictions and the root of all the chores and distractions of this world, then naturally all kinds of negative deeds would be stopped, would be put into a stop. So we need to first work with self-grasping. According to the Madhyamika Avatara, it talks about the yogis should first stop grasping onto a self. Why is that? It is because of Sakaditi. That is the root that sprung from that root sprung the obstructions of afflictions. That is why, as a yogi, we need to eradicate such self-grasping. Just as the fire in our stove, after it ceases, there is still smoke. Once the fire stops, once the fire stops, the smoke naturally would cease. Also, in the sutras, it talks about it is only through the lion's roar of the Buddha which talks about the selflessness or the non-existence of a self. This is quite crucial. By recognizing it, I think in Buddhism, once we recognize that, then we can engage in all kinds of practice. That is why we need to study the selflessness or the non-existence of a self. This is really not that difficult. Not difficult, for example, through theory. It's not difficult to understand it as long as you study, for example, the root verses on Madhyamika, the Madhyamika Avatara, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, and then the precious garland of Madhyamika, the 400 verses, and so on. Once you study this, unless you're really foolish and don't understand it, other than that, I think it would be easy for you to understand the non-existence of a self theoretically. We're so used to talk about I, me. We talk about this even in our dreams. We talk about this is this is me. So we have lots of those self and self-grasping. If we were to use theory to make analysis, none of those would be existent, and none of those graspings, and all of those graspings would naturally collapse. I am sure that I've talked to you many times that to encounter the Dharma teachings of Prajnaparamita is extremely rare, and if we have not, through those teachings, to attain the realization of selflessness and the teaching of no self, that would be such a pity. But of course, when it comes to practice, even if you have glimpsed a little bit of that non-self, sometimes it is just like the sun. Sometimes it shines bright, and sometimes it hides behind the dark clouds. That's just natural. So we need to continue to practice. Now, in terms of this great Terton, I think he must have studied Madhyamika, though he didn't talk too much about it. We only are aware of the termas that he reviewed because he's renowned for it, but he doesn't really talk too much about theory. However, being a disciple of Patrul Rinpoche, also a disciple of Mipa Rinpoche, he received the Madhyamika teachings from Mipa Rinpoche, for example, and he studied the 9th chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So such a wise person, he can gain such understanding wherever and whomsoever he studied from. Through this analysis and his particular description, his particular logic, I'm sure we would be able to gain new understandings. He talks about that there are two types of graspings. The first one is grasping of self and grasping to the existence of phenomena. In terms of grasping of an existence of a self, is that, for example, someone says that, oh, this is me. I am existent because the three gates are existent. Sometimes when we talk about an existent self, we would talk about the five aggregates. The compounded five aggregates would form a false self, and then we would hold on to the five aggregates as a self. But over here, he speaks of grasping onto the three gates, that is, body, speech, and mind, as grasping to an existence of a self. All the way from beginningless time for lifetimes, we have no idea, and we do not make investigation on who is that so-called self, whether it truly exists, whether it is truly existent or not. Sometimes I would go to different prestigious universities, and I would particularly see whether they understand the truth about self. Because I think the common civilians, I understand that they have not spent much time contemplating on it, and based on their education, the environment they live in, they don't really think too much about it. But the students and the people in prestigious universities are the ones who people really admire and think that they have gained great understanding, and each of them feel that they are already in heaven, in celestial realm, once they enter into those prestigious universities. But even those people are completely being tied by the solid grasping to a self. And once I noticed that, a sense of compassion just genuinely arise in my mind, because if these people that are so educated have not even contemplated on that and still fettered in this way in samsara, that is such quite a pity. In this world, if we do not contemplate on who am I, what is I, am I truly existent or not, we had never truly asked about that. We just blindly believe in it. Ever since being a young child, since 2 or 3 years old, our sense of grasping to self, though vague and maybe more blurry than what we have now, but there is still a sense of self that is called the innate grasping towards an existent self, not only to people but to animals such as yaks and animals that we see on TV shows and all that. Majority of animals, I mean all animals, would fight, would strive to survive. This is based on that innate grasping towards an existent self. Even if the foolish, the most ignorant animal, they would grasp onto self. They would hold onto the 3 gates as a self. As human beings, as we grow up, then we encounter all kinds of theories and knowledge and the wrong kinds of philosophical schools, so on and so forth. All of those then kept on giving us teachings on, oh, there is an existent Atman, a soul that is forever existent, or God, or so on and so forth. And following different cultures, traditions, and habitual tendencies, and so on and so forth. There are different kinds of thinkings that's then implanted in ourselves, and this is the imputed grasping to an existent self. The non-Buddhist schools, the other teachings, philosophies, kept on giving us these kinds of teachings. Nowadays, there are a group of ancient religions are slowly disappearing. However, there are a lot more of new knowledge, new religions kept on spurring. A lot of them would take the religious terminologies and meanings from other religions and piece all of them together and then form a particular school or a particular religion. So there are a lot more of these kinds of thinkings that's going on in this world. And that is the teaching on the imputed self. The different schools would say that there is a constant self, there is unchanging self, autonomous self, so on and so forth. They would consider that is the imputed grasping to an existent self. When it comes to the object of our perceptions, this, whatever we see, whatever we hear and feel and all that, those are considered as the grasping to the existence of the phenomena. As long as you feel that the object, the phenomena, are existent, then that is considered as the grasping towards the existence of phenomena. In the past, we would consider that people outside, animals outside, the phenomena outside, as well as my shoes, hats, and so on and so forth. Those are the objects of mine, and as long as you hold on to those as the existent, then those are considered as the grasping towards the existence of phenomena. When it comes to the grasping to an existent self, there are the two types, the innate and then the imputed. Also, when it comes to the grasping towards the existence of phenomena, there are the two as well. If you are simply grasping on the existence of the external phenomena without having any ideas from different schools and philosophy, then that is the innate grasping towards the existence of self. And then when it comes to holding on to the existence of phenomena based on the different kinds of philosophical schools, such as maybe following a wrong philosophical school or religions with wrong views. On top of that, there are the Hinayana traditions, such as holding on to an existent smallest mote or smallest atom that is existent, and then existence of the smallest unit of time. If you were to hold on to those are considered as the imputed grasping towards a phenomena. There are the four types then altogether, the innate and imputed grasping towards self, the existence of self, and then the same innate and imputed grasping towards an existent phenomenon. When it comes to an existence, for example, there are different philosophical schools or a different school that talks about how the bottle itself is not empty, and then the existence of the bottle is empty. It seems that the bottle has two entities then, but that is not true. It is only how they explained it. Each of us, the sentient beings, if we were to hold on to this particular Dharma teaching or this particular phenomena or the existence of people, if they were to hold on to something that is existent, then we don't need to talk about the existence of a phenomena or of a self. That is not necessary, because as long as you hold onto or grasp onto something to be existent, then it is grasping. There are different kinds of debates on it. And this kind of so-called existence is not even existent in the conventional truth according to Madhyamika Avatara.
Well,
the two types of grasping are conventionally appearing and existent. However, the two kinds of self-grasping are not truly existent in conventional truth. It should be easy to understand. It means that, well, the innate grasping to an existent self is existent in within all mundane beings. Other than the kinds of practitioners who have already eradicated that, within all sentient beings, even animals and the mundane beings, as well as all the birds and insects and human beings, they have the innate grasping towards an existent self. However, arhats, bodhisattvas, and yogis who attained the realization of selflessness, then they do not have that innate grasping towards self anymore. In terms of the imputed grasping towards an existent self, would be existent for the ones who, for example, believe in a creator, a god, or an autonomous self, and all of those people who have been influenced by those kinds of philosophical schools. Now, in terms of the four types of grasping, the innate, imputed grasping towards the self and towards the phenomena, there are the four types of graspings. We need to work with these. How do we work with that? It means that we need to first come to realization of no self. First, we need to realize that there is no intrinsic existence of a self, and then come to the realization of that phenomena does not have an existent self either. So come to the realization of the no self of self and the no existence of phenomena. Chandrakirti once said that in order to liberate all sentient beings, I give the teachings of no existence of self. And then there are the different categories of, or the different ways of talking about the no existence of self. I think the teachings given by the great Terton is quite interesting. Firstly, we need to come to the view of no existence of a self. If we were to rely on our wisdom and to make analysis of our body, speech, and mind, which is the three gates, because the particular method that is used by the great Terton is to make the logical analysis through the three gates. This is quite rare within the various kinds of shastras. Firstly, we need to understand that there is no intrinsically existent self. In order to understand it, there are three aspects. The first one is to rely on our wisdom to make analysis of our body, our skin, blood, and our bones and organs, as well as our hair and all that. In the sutras, it often talk about the 36 impurities. If we were to make observation of it again and again, then you would be able to understand that how could I exist? There is no way that I exist. There is no way that I exist within the body. So you would be able to come to the understanding of it, especially through the Western anatomy studies. For example, if you were to place the flesh and fluid and bones and all of your nerve systems, if you were to categorize them, separate them by categories and place them in different categories and then look for where am I? Where is that self? Or you can look at the corpse. If you can look at a corpse in such a way, we can investigate our body right now in such a way. People may say that, well, after a person dies, of course you can find the self, but when I'm alive, I think that is the time for you to truly investigate where is that self. after investigating in the way that is described here, you won't be able to find it. Lots of the scholars of West and East, they had never even truly investigated in this way, which is quite strange. Sometimes I would go to different prestigious universities and give talks and speeches to scholars and professors, scientists. I feel rather quite confident to argue with them or debate with them on this particular issue. It is not because I'm very wise, it is rather because Buddhism is of great wisdom. I could argue that we could debate in such a way that is there an eye on the body or on the speech or on the mind? Where is it? Other than body, speech, and mind, is there another way for you to exist? We can go through debate in this way. And these kinds of debate are not based on religion. It is solely based on logic. That is why after people studied the teachings on no self, they would be able to truly understand that conventionally and through the observation there is truly no existent self. So this is the first observation, that is through the body. And the next one is through the observation of speech. Well, since we had already come to the conclusion that there is no self in the body, let's look at the speech. Whatever kinds of speech, it may be good speech, bad speech, the praises, the slanders, whatever kinds of speech. Is there a self there? This is easy to come to a conclusion, isn't it? There is no self at all. And then if we were to make observation of our mind again, the body, speech, and mind, the mind, which is the third one. In terms of mind, there's the good thoughts, bad thoughts, and the neutral thoughts. Out of all three, would you be able to find a self? After making observation, you would be able to come to the conclusion that the mind is not I either. After making all of these investigations, you will come to the conclusion by yourself that I am not existent, or self is not existent. I think making such observation, it should be easy for you to come to such a conclusion. But sadly, not many people pay attention to it. Indeed, human beings are quite pitiful in this regard. Many people would consider themselves to be very wise and have lots of knowledge, but they don't understand it. As I said earlier, if you were to be a farmer or herder and people who had never exposed to these kinds of knowledge, and if they don't have any understanding of no self, then I completely understand it, because they were never given such opportunities. But for people who contemplate upon it and who have studied these kinds of knowledge, then you need to truly make investigation. After investigating through the three gates, and the self do not exist on any of the three gates, then you need to make observation with your wisdom on the five aggregates. For example, is there a self existent with a combination of the three gates, just as an old horse with a small horse right standing beside it? Is there a big self? Is there a small self right beside the three gates? To make such observation, then you would be able to generate true faith that the self do not exist, because it doesn't exist in the way of being one with the three gates nor being other with the three gates. This is easy to understand, just as the two horses. if one were to, the big horse being the body, speech, and mind, and the other one being self, it is not of one or other with each other. So we would be able to see that the body, speech, and mind, and the so-called self is neither one nor of other entities. After contemplating in this way, then you would not have any doubts on the existence or non-existence of self. When we study the 400 verses of Madhyamika, for example, after studying it, you would come to a firm understanding that I do not exist. I do not exist. I think through logic, it's very easy. Whenever I study the teachings on Madhyamika through logic, for example, the ornament of Madhyamika, it says that a person is not of earth element, water element, nor of fire, wind, and space. It was through the investigation of the 5 great elements. The 5 elements are not me. Or another method of investigating on the non-existence of self is through the teachings of Bodhisattva Charyavatara, where it talks about the hair, nails, blood, and flesh. None of those is me. According to the Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, there are the 7 inferences taught. It talks about, for example, the one or other entities of the 5 aggregates, which is a shared method in the root verses of Madhyamika as well. When you're making observation, they're not existent. But then, Gunden Chopo also said that when you make observation, you come to the true understanding that I do not exist. But at the moment your body is pierced by a needle, at that moment you feel that I do exist. It seems to be very paradoxical. He then said that theoretically I do not exist, but in the practice I am still existent, or in the through the theory I'm not existent. At times of practice I'm not existent, but in the daily life, in our habitual tendencies through life, we are still confused and we still feel that we're existent. Just as people with eye issues, sometimes they would see floaters. That is why sentient beings are indeed quite pitiful. They would hold on to something that is not existent to be existent. But such things cannot be found at all. That is why we're so ignorant. After you come to this understanding, after come to full realization of this teaching, this is called to realize the selflessness of people, of self. All sentient beings usually would say that, oh, I walk, I stay, I eat, I so on. So they would talk about I a lot. And then not only the mundane beings, but even the yogis sometimes would say that I liberate, I am confused. Or even the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would speak of my teaching, my followers, my retinues. Then people may wonder, well, since you are talking about there is no existence of a me, of a self, then why would they speak of it? But these beings who had already attained selflessness, they are simply speaking of the self by using such a term. They understand that it is not the true self, it is rather the dreamlike self. According to Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, in the first volume, since I translated a portion of it, but haven't continued yet. In the first volume, there is a question saying that if I do not exist, why at the beginning of each of the sutras, the Buddha would say that, thus have I heard. And then Nagarjuna answered by saying that the I that the Buddha talked about was the I to comply with the worldly being's habits. In fact, it is not the true I, it is not the truly existent I. Now, whenever you have time, I encourage you to read into the teachings given in the Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra. It is simply of speaking of a self that is of untrue nature. It is like a water bubble, the reflection of a moon. It is not truly existent. It is simply a term, I. It is not existent, but you don't need to refute it, because the conventional untrue I is simply a nominal I that is not worthy to be debated about. In the Madhyamika teachings, it says that there is no Madhyamika school that would specifically debate about the existence in terms of conventional seeing, hearing, feelings, and cognition. So this non-existent, this illusory self is simply relying on our three gates and being established by our mind. It is just a hallucination, or in some ways we would say that it's simply a nominal self. According to Yogacarya Vatara, where it says that Yogacarya Shastra, it says that why to speak of a self? There are a few reasons. The first one is that it builds a bridge for the beings that have attained realization of no self to communicate with the worldly beings. And the second one is to comply with the worldly beings. The third one is in order to eradicate the fear of non-existence of the self, because there are the non-Buddhist practitioners or non-Buddhist schools that would fear a lot about non-existence of a self. The fourth reason is that once to speak of a self, then once there is a nominal self, then it becomes the reliant place for merits and faults, so that people would be able to generate faith to practice virtue. These are the few reasons. The great Terton Lerab Lingpa had given the teachings about over 100 years ago. This was composed about 1923, around the later parts of his life. By relying on his teaching through different languages, we now have revisited his thoughts and his wisdom and made his teachings vivid and alive again. By the direct pointing out of selflessness given by the great Terton Master, I really feel the great blessings. Through the analysis, I'm not so sure if you'll be able to understand it. The teachings are really not that difficult, and he has not given these teachings in a hidden way. Rather, it's very obvious. We can just make observation with our body, speech, and mind. The body, speech, and mind are something that we can make observation of at all times. It is not like we have to look at the different parts of a computer or of a camera and so on. Rather, we can just simply look inwardly and then make observation of where is that I in our body, speech, and mind. Where is that I that I hold on to day and night? Where is it? And then we would be able to come to the understanding that I truly do not exist, but it's simply because we're so ignorant. We hold on to it, but a great compassionate Buddha speaks of the truth as such, and that's how we would be able to come to the realization that we do not exist. Slowly, with our understanding of no self, and then we can naturally come to the understanding of the non-existence of phenomena as well.
发我
Not so sure if you're tired at night. Maybe a bit too tired. Well, the best time to listen to the Dharma is in the morning. However, many people would like to sleep in the morning, so I don't have the heart to wake you up too early in the morning. Now, in terms of the selflessness of phenomena, or non-existence of phenomena, to put it in simple words, he says that just as someone would ask, or someone would think that the previous part was the investigation of selflessness of a self, and then this part is the non-existence of phenomena. He gives the example of a snake. He says that, well, you just like when you see a rope and misunderstood it as a snake. At the moment of turning on light, you would be able to understand that the snake does not exist. It is simply the confused understanding, and the confusion, the root of confusion is the existence of the, or the presence of the colorful rope. Just as we studied in the entering into the gate of Mahayana, where it talks about the metaphor of the snake. Some people may feel that, well, the snake does not exist, but the root of it, or the foundation of it, which is the colorful rope, is existent. Just as we would talk about, well, I do not exist, but the body is touchable, is seeable, and the languages can communicate and can be heard. Also, there are different kinds of objects to the mind, so those exist. People may feel in such a way. However, if you think that the snake does not exist, just as how a self does not exist, but the object of my grasping, my body, my speech, the object of speech, the object of the body, those are all existent. And someone may say that, well, I think you're right. I have already attained the realization of no true existence of a self, but it seems that the phenomena still exist. The object of our speech and body, speech, and mind still exist. That is to say that the poisonous snake does not exist, but the confused foundation of that is the rope is existent. That is not reasonable. Why is that? It is because the body, speech, and mind, in fact, the body itself is appearing is empty form. The speech itself is empty sound, because the nature of them are simply empty, and then the mind itself is empty is empty thought. This is the teachings in Vajrayana. For those of you who had never studied it, when we speak of empty form, empty sound, and empty thought, then they probably don't have any feelings about it, because they have no concept of it. But for that is why for That is why we're not afraid to leak our secrets, because even for people who never even studied it, they would not be able to understand it. A book, whether good or bad, it really depends on whether you would be able to enter into the essence of this book. Without entering into the essence of the book, then the words and the sentences and the whatever kinds of contents within the book are simply just white paper and black prints. Other than that, there is nothing else. So the precious books that we cherish are only cherished by the wise ones. So only the wise ones would be able to feel the blessings from those books. The libraries and our library over here have lots of such books that's infused with wisdom. If we make analysis, or if we make such logical understandings, logical analysis, then we would be able to understand that the body speech are simply not, they are inanimate. And then to make observation of the inanimate, they are of no coarse parts, coarse existence. The body or speech, they are simply made of atoms. Even the speech itself, if we were to make observation of it, coming to the very end, we would be able to come to the smallest atom, and even the smallest atom does not exist. And the sound, according to Hinayana tradition, it is considered as one of the 8 modes, or 8 atoms, or 8 smallest unit of matter. When we studied entering into the way of a great vehicle, it talks about how we at first would mistaken the colorful robe to be a poisonous snake, and then slowly to make observation. After we recognize that it is simply our misunderstanding and confusion, the snake does not exist. And then when it comes to the colorful robe, if we were to tear open the ropes, we would get smaller threads, and then eventually some fiber, and then the fiber can be divided into atoms. That is why the poisonous snake does not exist, and neither does the colorful rope. This is another way of making observation. Now, in terms of making observation of mind, since we had already made observation of body and sound, the mind simply is just the aspects of cognition. And when we make observation of it, the 5 aspects of mind, it does not exist. Or if we were to make observation of the 3 times, it doesn't exist. Or if we were to use the method of Omahon to make observation of mind, it does not exist. So through this understanding, we understand that the body, speech, and mind does not exist. They are simply of the nature of emptiness. And after understanding that, this is the understanding or the realization of the non-self of phenomena, the non-existence of phenomena. This is quite an important realization and understanding. Through this particular observation, I hope that you can focus on the teachings, and I hope that you can give other people teachings on the 3 supremes. Whenever you have more time, you can listen to the Dharma teaching again. And though I feel that I have not given the best teachings on this text, but I really feel the blessings and power from it. It seems that the words are quite easy. It is on an easy topic of the three supremes. But through the teachings given over here in such a pithy instruction way, we would be able to come to the realization of selflessness, of self, and of phenomena. And then once you come to the realization of no self and no existence of self and no existent phenomena, then you don't need to study Madhyamika anymore. You don't need to go to different classes to attend those Madhyamika lessons anymore. Your mind is free to soar under the sky and on top of the snowy mountains of the land of Tibet. I really feel that this is a very pithy instruction given here. Terton Lerab Lingpa continued to give the instructions, saying that this is the teaching of the non-existence of all phenomena, and all phenomena simply are like an illusion. In fact, all karma and causes and conditions, all of those are understood as existent in the conventional way. Previously, we had already talked about how conventionally there is a self, conventionally there are phenomena. However, with our wisdom, we would be able to observe that let it be our mind or externally in the phenomena, we cannot even find any true existence, even as the size as a sesame seed. It is not that difficult to understand or to come to a realization of selflessness in the theories. I'm not bluffing about it. Years ago, I think I've also written it in A Journey to the West. I think when I was in France, I gave a Dharma teaching, a short Dharma teaching on the selflessness of self and phenomena. When I studied only for a very short period of time. I just got ordained in 1985, and 3 years after, I studied Madhyamika. When I first studied it, I really felt very much immersed into the teachings of Madhyamika. And now I feel that when I talk about the non-true existence of self, and when I talk about emptiness, I think the Westerners got very interested. And sometimes I really feel that they got some insight through those teachings. Mainly it is because the Westerners tend to prefer the logical analysis and inferences, and I thought it was quite rare. It was really interesting. Many people may feel quite scared that, oh, I don't exist. I've studied and practiced for so many years and made the aspiration to be reborn in Sukhavati. Isn't that of a great waste of time? But that is not true, because if you were to engage in the Dharma teachings of, for example, 400 verses and so on, it speaks of if you were to generate doubts or even fear, that means you have already started to uproot the foundation of samsara, means that you're progressing. So you do not need to doubt, do not need to fear, because in conventional truth, it is not going to be empty, so you don't need to be afraid. Over here it talks about how all phenomena are of no true existence, and they're simply as illusions. All of the karma and causes and conditions do exist in conventional truth. This is called the conventional truth, and it speaks of the relations of the two truths. The nature of all of the nature of the conventional truth do not have any true existence. This is called the nature of emptiness. This is the ultimate truth of all the all the Dharma. And then the two truths had been spoken about in the fundamental wisdom of Madhyamika, as well as the entering into the great vehicle. The teachings given by the Buddha, where it speaks of the ultimate truth and the conventional truth, this is quite important. Without understanding the two truths, it would be very difficult. For mundane beings, there are the two truths. However, it is simply the two different aspects of one nature. I think this is really important because in front of the noble beings who had already attained realization, they are of no contradiction. Over here, it talks about the different aspects of the one nature. In terms of form and seeing and touch the objects, that is the nature of form. Cannot be touched by hands, cannot be seen by eyes. It is simply manifested in front of the mundane beings who are confused. The two truths may appear to be contradictory, but such contradiction are simply elaborations and would not vanish into dharmata if one were to be confused. The nature of the two truths means that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. It means that in the form, which is the object to be perceived, it is of form and emptiness, the non-duality of form and emptiness, it is of one taste. It simply rests in the perception that is devoid of elaboration, which is also the pure Dharmata. The noble ones who are still on the path of study in their meditative wisdom, as well as the ones, as well as the Buddha who's beyond the path of study, who's on the path of beyond study, and who had already attained the great fundamental wisdom of non-duality. At the time of meditative state, as well as the post-meditative state, that is their realization. For these noble beings in the meditative state and the meditative and post-meditative state of the Buddha, the Dharmata and the fundamental wisdom is of no difference. They are of one taste. Other than that, there is not even a little bit of separation of the two manifestations. And because of that, they would abide in the nature that is beyond any changes or transmigrations. However, at the same time, for the noble beings, when they are abiding in the meditative state, they would abide in such nature that is beyond a change or transmigration, but the manifestation appears clearly without mixing or contradicting with one another. That is the manifestations that they perceive, or that is the perceptions that they would perceive. For the noble ones, form is no other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. The subject and object, or the apprehender and apprehended, are no other. They appear clearly without mixing with one another. Such kinds of understanding in front of the mundane beings, they usually would take it as contradictory, but for the noble beings, they do not see them as contradictory at all. That is why, according to Mipa Rinpoche's beacon of certainty, it says that the great masters would use the word of wondrous to praise such non-duality of it. For mundane beings, what appears to be contradictory are not contradictory in front of noble ones. That is why it is wondrous. It is not because the manifestations are wondrous. In fact, the nature of all phenomena are just like that. Within the nature of every appearances, in fact, within the Dharmata, in fact, it could manifest everything. It appears and it ceases. It has the apprehender and apprehended. It has the conditioned and unconditioned differences in terms of its appearances and manifestations. At times of the post-meditation state in our daily life, there are all kinds of birth and death, all kinds of apprehender and apprehended, all kinds of conditioned and unconditioned. At the time of appearance, they still abide in the nature that is non-dual, that is without any elaboration, that is simply in the union of two. This is the understanding of Madhyamika. And then the great Terton used a very humble tone to speak of the view of Madhyamika. He states that because of the different kinds of manifestation of phenomena, the manifestation had never parted from the nature which is emptiness. This is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Of course, in front of us, it's never like that. But in front of Manjushri, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This is the teaching of Madhyamika. But for mundane beings, such kind of view is just like water and fire are completely contradictory to one another. But for the noble ones, they are not contradictory at all. The great Terton is speaking of this very humbly, saying that as a beginner, I am so and that, so we'll continue from here tomorrow. The first part talks about, to make a summary of it, the first part talks about how the mundane beings, and the second part talks about Madhyamika, especially the view of the selflessness or the non-true existence of a self and non-true existence of a phenomena. Third aspect talks about Mahayati and Mahamudra. The previous life, that is the great Terton Lerab Lingpa, is indeed very humble. Now let us stop here today.
Sunam dai damche zogpa nye tomna ni be jana panche jang jirga nanchi ralong chukpa chibum solen drowa drubara shoy